This story begins in a small village where a peculiar tradition is followed. In this village, when a guest arrives, a beautiful woman is sent to keep the guest's bed warm and live as his wife during his stay. Women who perform this role are referred to as sleeping distillery. The story is set in the 1930s when the British government introduces a new rule, sending their officials to remote villages to educate the locals. As part of this initiative, a man named John is assigned to a remote village in Malaysia. The village is extremely underdeveloped, and John uses a boat to reach the area. Upon arrival, he waits for someone to escort him and eventually meets a native named Nubanga who can speak English. Nubanga takes John to the village where he meets the governor, Henry. John and Henry travel together in a jeep, and during the journey, Henry explains the peculiar customs of the village. Henry also questions why someone as educated as John chose to come to such a remote place. John shares that it was his late father's dream to educate tribal communities, and after his father's death during the war, John felt compelled to fulfill this mission. They arrive at a house deep in the jungle, where Henry informs John that the villagers will visit him the next day to discuss his plans. The next day, the tribal leader, Malaka, and other villagers visit John. Among them is a beautiful woman named Salima, who offers John a drink. John refuses, but Nubanga convinces him to accept, explaining that refusing could offend the villagers. Reluctantly, John drinks and notices Salima's enchanting beauty. As the meeting progresses, Salima performs a mesmerizing dance that captivates John. After her performance, the villagers ask John to entertain them. He recites an English poem, but the villagers neither understand it nor enjoy it. To salvage the situation, John decides to dance and partners with Nubanga in a light-hearted romantic dance, which amuses the villagers immensely. The following day, Henry informs John about nearby mining activities involving Chinese workers who are being harassed by the local tribes. He warns John to stay cautious. Shortly after, Malaka arrives with Salima and explains the village's tradition. Since John doesn't understand the local language, Henry translates, revealing that whenever a European guest visits, a beautiful woman is chosen to stay with him as his wife. This shocks John, who initially assumes Salima is being forced into this role. When he confronts her, Salima assures him she is willing and desires to be his wife during his stay. Henry further explains that this custom is known as sleeping distillery. Salima shares her personal story, revealing that her mother was also part of this tradition, and her father was an Englishman. She sees this as an opportunity to learn English better and feels a genuine connection with John. Reluctantly, John agrees, and their story unfolds amidst the challenges and cultural differences of the village. John agrees to keep Salima with him, but he says that he will teach her his language but will never romance with her. Henry becomes angry at this, and Salima doesn't like it either, but in the end, she agrees to John's terms. Salima starts living with John, but John keeps his distance. He never stays close to her and even sleeps in a separate room at night. The next day, Nubanga comes and mocks John. He gives John a severed monkey's head, and John gets scared upon seeing it. Everyone starts laughing, but Salima gets very angry at them. Gradually, it becomes known that John doesn't sleep with Salima, and some people begin to think that John might be gay. Then we see John's uncle bringing a gay beauty for John, saying that maybe he will like her, but John gets angry and says that they have rubbish in their minds. He then drives Salima out of his house. The next day, John goes out and finds Salima sitting outside. He feels bad and asks her why she hasn't gone back to her house. His uncle tries to explain, saying that she can't leave because everyone will get angry at her if she does. John then realizes his mistake and tells Salima that she is very beautiful and that he likes her, but he doesn't feel like being with her physically. Salima and John continue living together, but John still hasn't fallen in love with her. The next day, John meets Henry's wife, Eggy, who tells him that people are talking about him everywhere. She says that there is something wrong with him, and that people are pointing fingers at poor Salima because John doesn't love her. But John doesn't respond, and returns home. As time passes, John becomes closer to Salima. One night, Salima asks him if he has ever loved any woman. John says that until he gets married, he won't touch anyone. Salima tells him that if he doesn't experience it, his wife won't be satisfied with him, and he should understand all these things beforehand. They keep talking, and then John stretches out his hand towards Salima. She holds his hand, but nothing further happens. The next day, they are sitting and playing with children when Nubanga comes and mocks them, saying that Europeans are useless and that they are stronger. John, after hearing this, challenges Nubanga, saying that he has lived in the jungle but he can stay in water for longer. Nubanga accepts the challenge and they both jump into the water. The timer starts, and after a minute, Nubanga comes out, but John stays underwater. Nubanga becomes angry, and the people are amazed. John then reveals that he had an oxygen mask, which is why he could stay underwater longer. He wanted to show that Western civilization is advanced. Everyone becomes very happy. Meanwhile, John and Salima start to express love for each other inside the house. John explains the names of body parts, and then they kiss. Afterward, John gives Salima a banana. John and Salima have a daily routine, but Salima wakes up earlier than John every day. When John asks her why she does so, Salima responds, "Because you don't consider me your wife, that's why I wake up before you." One day, Henry invites John to his house for dinner, where John meets a beautiful woman named Sheila. Sheila does not approve of the sleeping separately tradition and criticizes it, calling it an animalistic rule. The next day, Sheila visits John to learn the tribal language and interacts with everyone. However, she prefers to stay close to John, which angers Salima, as she does not want anyone getting close to him. Later, Sheila asks John to take a photo with her. Seeing this, Salima becomes furious and, in her native language, tells John to stop all this, but John does not refuse Sheila. Meanwhile, they notice something unusual in the water. Henry gets angry and blames the Chinese miners near the area for causing the disturbance. John decides to investigate what's happening there. At that moment, Amy approaches John and tells him that Sheila likes him. She suggests that if John marries Sheila, they will build a school for him, allowing him to educate the local children. It turns out Sheila is Henry's daughter. John returns home and finds Salima extremely upset. He tries to console her and apologizes, saying he's sorry for not refusing Sheila. Salima retorts, "All men are the same. I'm doing everything for you. Am I not enough to make you happy?" Hearing this, John gets angry and walks away. The next day, they head toward the location of the incident to investigate what's happening. As they approach the village, they discover that a pandemic has broken out there. A man suddenly attacks John, but he manages to survive. John, along with Nubanga, chases after the man. They eventually reach a place where they see many Europeans mining and extracting silver. When John returns, he finds Salima sick. Soon, other tribal people approach them, seemingly ready to attack. John persuades them to live together peacefully and offers them food. During this, John realizes these tribes do not cultivate rice, but have an abundance of it. This makes John suspect that the Europeans supplied the rice and mixed it with medicine to make the tribal people sick and wipe them out. When John informs the tribes of this, they unite and attack the Europeans, killing all of them. The tribal people then thank John and give him and Salima a bracelet. At this moment, John tells Salima that he loves her and wants to spend his entire life with her. Salima, overwhelmed with happiness, reciprocates his feelings, saying she wants to spend her life with him as well. John then informs Henry of his decision to be with Salima. Henry dissuades him, sharing that he too had a love story, but couldn't be with his beloved. John blames Henry for letting go of the woman he loved. At that moment, Amy arrives and advises John to leave the place for a year. She explains that once the tribes discover his relationship with Salima, they won't spare her. Meanwhile, Salima discusses with her people about marrying John, but they scold her harshly, accusing her of betrayal. She is soon imprisoned. John rushes to free her, but realizes that Salima will continue to suffer as long as he stays there. Heartbroken, he leaves the place for Salima's sake. A year passes, and John marries Sila. They begin living together. Sila inquires about Salima, to which John reveals that Salima married Chandulal. John and Sila then return to the village, where John plans to educate the children and establish a school. Witnessing these positive changes, John feels content. One night, while everyone watches a movie, John's gaze constantly searches for Salima. Later, when Sila tries to be intimate with John, he doesn't respond. Sila expresses her frustration, saying she'll never take Salima's place in his heart. John reassures her, saying he's trying his best to love her like he loved Salima. Sila also reveals that even the cook doesn't like her. John takes the cook to an officer named Neville. While preparing food for Neville, John notices an injury on Neville's sleeping distillery worker, named Deepak. This saddens John. Neville remarks that if John didn't love Salima, she wouldn't be in her current state, and if he hadn't married Sila, she would have been his, Neville's, wife. Meanwhile, Amy advises her daughter to stop expecting love from John if he doesn't love her back. John overhears this conversation and kisses Sila in front of Amy to show his commitment. The next day, while at work, John sees Salima. She is holding a child, and Nubanga is with her. The child has blue eyes and fair skin. John instantly realizes the child is his. He goes to Babarchi, and Babarchi tells him that he is your child. His name is Mandar. Then, John makes a plan to meet Salima. John tells Babarchi to tell Deepak that he needs help to meet Salima. According to the plan, Salima comes to meet John at night. When she sees him, she starts to run, but John stops her, and for the first time, he looks at his child. He picks up his child in his arms. The next day, John makes a toy for his son, Amy sees this and becomes happy, thinking that Seela is going to become a mother, but John tells her that Seela is not going to become a mother. The next day, John goes to his child with the toy. Nubanga sees this too, and at night, he comes to John and injures him. When Henry finds out about this, he tells his men that Nubanga must be killed now. Then he stops John from going to Salima, saying, "I did the same thing. Salima is my daughter, but I have forgotten her." The next day, Nubanga was to be punished. John tries to get Nubanga forgiven, but Nubanga admits his crime. John postpones the decision to the next day. At night, Salima comes to John and tells him to save Nubanga by any means. Seela sees all of this from a distance. The next day, John announces his decision. He gives Nubanga the death sentence. That night, Salima goes to steal the keys to the jail, but the keys are missing. She reaches the cell and sees that John has freed Nubanga and given him a gun to escape. John then confesses his love for Salima again, saying that they will leave this place with their child. As soon as John returns home, Seela tells him that she is going to be a mother. John becomes worried again. Meanwhile, Henry finds out that Nubanga has escaped, and then Neville tells the villagers that he wants to make Salima a sleeping Distonori, and the villagers agree. Now, at night, Neville tries to take Salima, but she and Baburchi knock him unconscious. Meanwhile, John is writing a letter to Seela. Seela sees this note and says nothing. Salima has been waiting for John for a long time, but John arrives very late. Salima goes towards the river, and Henry follows her. He tries to stop her, but then he feels pity for her because Salima is his daughter. Henry gives Salima a gun, and Salima realizes that Henry is her father. They both embrace each other and cry. Meanwhile, Neville goes out to search for John and Salima. John meets Salima, but Neville arrives there and says, "I have been waiting for you." He then orders them to put on handcuffs, and Neville starts touching Salima. John attacks Neville, but Neville overpowers John and is about to kill him when suddenly he is shot. The shot was fired by Salima. The tribesmen arrive and kill Neville. Now, John stays with the people. John and Salima dance together. The story ends here.